we'd like to welcome today Lisa Orm Bickmore back to our campus because she's a fellow Cougar. She received both bachelor and master's degrees here, but unfortunately did some graduate work at the University of Utah. She now teaches at Salt Lake Community College as an associate professor, and she's published academic and creative works in teaching English in the two-year college, Tar River Poetry, Cake Train, The Hunger Mountain Review, Terrain, and Quarterly West. Her book of poetry, Haste, is meditative and fierce simultaneously, a feat that amateur poets only dream of, so it's no wonder that her book is listed on Amazon for over $100. This book is pure gold, and I just heard she has copies today, probably for a great discounted price. Her current interests include digital forms of composition, the constantly shifting landscape of digital and print publications, and the power of narrative in argument. And we'd like to thank her for coming and welcome her here today. Lisa Bickmore.
Well, after that introduction, I have to say this, that one's loyalties are to one's baccalaureate granting institution. And I have been known to say that there is nothing more insufferable than a Ute fan, so. Okay, so, and also I have to say about that book is out of print, and it has bemused me in a serious way to see how much it costs now. So I was able to scare up some copies, and as you say, I will not be charging $168 for them. All right. So I chose work that, some older work and mostly newer work. So I'm going to mostly read straight through and not have lots of explanatory remarks. So I'll start with a poem called My Failure. My failure, I hail you at the start, though most I meet you at the ends of days, at the door with the mail, the packages, the dog's enthusiasms. Like him, you live with me, mark my entrances and exits, stand by my blank page, and when it's filled, hold it up for me to see. I think you are my secretary, my patron, my accomplice, for without you, dear wreck, how would I even manage to try? You know when I should have been sleeping. You sift through the leggy pages of my magazines, and when I wake, there you are, my botch, at the bed's edge waiting so we can get started. If I'd had my pick, I'd surely have picked a muse, but you remember me perhaps even better, and your thought hums right along with mine. Fiasco, my familiar, you try me, certainly, but even there you are my advocate. Present at the misstep, you behold the collapse, and I rely upon you, my abettor, my alibi, my proof, my retort, my plea. After you left, we crossed the river another dozen times, twice in taxis, walked to a new museum, bought books, found the Mermaid Cafe, and took the train to Hoth, where the stairs up to Church Street smelled of ancient urine, and the abbey kept falling invisibly to ruins under a brilliant sun. It was late September. The station, with all its hurry, had chocolate and crisps to eat. I bought a magazine. At the end of this journey, we had emptied ourselves of nearly every desire. Only the West still glittered, the unsought and unobtained, and you had gone home to your city of granite and further to your village, and we were alone with the Irish and the remnants of the dawn when we kissed you goodbye on St. Augustine Street, just blocks from St. Auden's and its ceiling made of clouds. Only hours from the last sunlight that poured like a river down the stone street. We walked to bronze and bird-stained joists, and the black pool for which the Vikings named the city was nowhere to be found, but everywhere was the absence of you. girls skipping with paper bag and hair bow, you sitting across from me at tea, me appeasing disconsolate Evie outside the exhibit of the ancient book. We viewed Yeats's notebooks, lingered over the faded signatures, and you were not there. The light was chalky, cold at the bone. Sirens brayed up the streets. Dublin would never miss us, but we, foreign and exhausted, longed for you at Halfpenny Bridge. The enigmatic saint stenciled in spray paint on the door spoke your names. This would all go on, and we would disappear, as the detail of a fresco altarpiece had, leaving just the outlined torso of someone once said to be holy. Let's get lost. That November in Vermont, most nights the painters shot pool at the Smoky Bar, and I went too for the sake of their company. For that month I stayed in Johnson so I could have the loneliness I craved, which nonetheless sent me into countryside and village, up the hill to a library for Freud and Mimnermos, and then down again after hours, down in the dark, back to the old mill and stream to my little room. I was out of my knowledge, as they would say in the 18th century, as John Clare said of Emmonsell's Heath, where as a boy he walked and rambled along the firs the whole day till I got out of my knowledge, when the very wildflowers seemed to forget me. Past the map, past the familiar fences, until it was a stumbling guess to get back to where I could glance again into the mirror which had lost most its silver, to see this barely familiar face shining in a different quarter of the sky. That autumnal location, the very proportion of less and less light, a painterly wash of grays, myself dressed in fallen leaves with a spine of cold creek water. Now in an album page through at midnight, when all are asleep but me, I see the birds flying, and myself too leaving before I had left. Last Sunday I took myself south and west, to the place where 2 weeks before a fire had raced through the hills. When I heard of it, I remembered I'd once gone there, just once, and so long ago, perhaps I'd invented it. I looked up the place, Rose Canyon, sold by the mine for open space, then taken back for what they thought might lie underneath, the rights to that, trumping whatever is above, creeks, meanders, deer, wild turkeys, the dirt road. And there it was, the sign, Rose Canyon Road. I'd driven right to it, followed it through a neighborhood, houses on either side as the road twisted and rose. These were not here before, I thought, but they were weathered enough to have been there for decades. The sky hung low, heavy, the aspen trees wet and aflame. I thought, I was here, I met him here. The man who was my husband then had made a meal over coals. The children were there. There were cows in and among the trees. I had come from work, was dressed all wrong to eat meat from an iron pot, a dessert made of apples and cooked over fire in a canyon late on a rainy day. I had never been there before, nor had I returned since till that day. I thought, I am lost at the mouth of the canyon closed with a gate. Someone owned the road rutted like the grooves and folds in a cortex. Seeing it these 20 years later, a signal ignited along my nerves. Enough, the closed gate said, with emphasis, though the place was still but for rain. This is a poem from Haste called The Snow Queen. It's written in 5 sections as it refers to the Hans Christian Andersen story. The Snow Queen, 1. 1st of November in an early snow, an eerie morning, the snow casting its alternate light as if itself luminous. Under a cold sky, I take the shears to lop the last roses, the blooms edged in ice, and I turn and almost see her, a near miss, since she had just left her cold signature. Only 2 days ago, all the flowers were singing their irrelevant songs. The blousy cosmos, I am tall, taller than all. Sweet pea vine, I twine among the taller flowers, but my habit is fragrance. Calliopeus, I am the sun, see my ragged rays. But she has made them to lie down, their cacophonous chorus quieted. One hears them reclining, their faint narcissistic complaint, but the lips of the roses are frozen shut. 2. I know the flowers don't sing, and yet among words, some of the most tuneful I know are names for flowers. The boy and the girl thought so. Under the verdure, the bower of roses under which they sat, with their little book naming the flora and fauna of their beautiful world. The shard of ice that invaded his eye turned him from their green book to the hard face of a frozen woman. Dante heard her too in stony rhymes, that woman who makes men spell out eternity in fragments of ice. The girl wanted to stay under the roses, suffused with fragrance and the light that seeped down through the filter of leaves. But the ice had worked its way to the boy's heart now. So infatuated he had become with the Snow Queen, and so the girl must go. 3. Why must she go? The fragment was not hers. Her eye remained uninfected, and she wanted to stay there with her book, the flowers, that impossibly kind light. But the boy had jeered at her and mocked their nature as a book for girls. He preferred his cold puzzle, assembling and disassembling, while his heart froze and his hands darkened, blue with cold. And the girl ran northward, barefoot, carrying the sympathetic sun as if it were the very blood that hastened her onward, that blood that would heal him. 4. My garden is not like the one in which Gerda tarried. We are well past first frost, and it is too late for tarrying or for beginning any mission of rescue. I can almost imagine or remember the full round day of summer, and then I think I might be that girl, my garden, emblem and effect of nature, that these flowers come up from under to redeem something, to publish their idiot songs, noise their chorus of color. In November, how easy to dismiss that chorus, to forget how persuasive are color and song, how they include one in wave on wave of opening and blooming and fading and dying. In the palace of ice, that sympathetic garden must come to mean everything, figured so irresistibly as a girl whose tears and embrace might thaw the hard sky, yield the sun, might melt the coldest eternal prison. 5. Tears and an embrace. How these opened the pair back into the wide, redeemed world where was no winter but only water and sun, where the roses sang an autonomous, soothing song. I am red, I am blood, I am nature, the feminine. If I choose, I shall open myself and heal you. As the boy became man, the girl a woman, it was a song whose meaning was made plain. This is a prose poem. Techno. All weekend, the windows of next door pulsed with it, as if something electric were bottled and filtered, but louder, harder, faster, and never ever stopping, not for days on end. How does anyone live in that? Work, read a newspaper or book, rest, pet the dog, make coffee or do laundry. How do people live together, live through that? I asked myself these questions weekend after weekend of the man who once helped us push our car up the ice of our driveway, whose boy sold us candy for his school, though he never delivered, whose stepdaughter was so pretty she was like melting sugar to insects. And thus her stepfather sat in his chair in the open garage with a chain he swung heavily into his own hand. The message being, there is nothing I would not do to you if you come within breathing distance of how sweet her neck must smell to you. There is nothing I would not do to build this wall of buzzing, beating, stinging sound. And so weekend after weekend we stayed away, hoped he was okay, hoped even after his wife and the children stopped living there, hoped even that he was still alive, though that music never once hesitated to announce to the street, no, 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 and we believed it. Through the snow and ice, through the cookies we left on the porch, through the smile and lifted hand I tried to telegraph, though he refused to notice it. And now the house empty, and now someone else has cleaned it out, ruined carpets piled in the garage. And now the last message he left to our street. All good children are asleep and dreaming, written on the front window with a finger in spray-on snow. Anyone who does a reading always has to think, like, how much is too much? I'm already asking myself that question, but I'm going to stop asking myself that question. Thaumaturge. The dead bird, or rather the bird's robes scattered as if it had been forcibly undressed, rise and drift back down at my footstir. The cat rests on the high back of the easy chair at the window, striped, tigerish. Most mornings she cozies up in the chair nook, feathers the blanket, though daily she also tears down the hall through the kitchen and back when she finds the twitch of her own tail unbearable, provoking. It's almost mouse season, the field in back her field, where she flees for all the warm hours, returning with a fat, a small, a young, a worn one to dismantle on the tile, leaving only a dark density of organs as evidence. But the bird she ate down to the last sticky bit at the ends of one feather. Up high she adorns the chair back, looks into the sun, the bird's heart a power inside her. This poem actually is taken from that George Jones song, Why Baby Why? You make me cry, baby, cry, baby, cry. So it has a little epigraph from that song. It's called Leaf and Wing, and the epigraph is When the Feathers Flew. I walked into a morning brilliant, distinct, each color having its day against a sky, the illustration of sky washed over with a powder of brightness, the dog eddying behind me, then surging ahead, cantering, capering, the leash emblem of love. My quadriceps bunched and relaxed. My feet had some kind of bounce in them, the music plugged into my ears, melancholy and cheerful. Last night I wanted to crawl into someone else's skin, wanted a body to press my body down to keep me from flying apart. What alchemy quells sickness from the soul? Is it doing and not being? The smile-bearing happiness out of sorrow, relevant today with the bush itself burning and quail flushing up as we near them. But also my colloquy with the dog, a muscular insistence. Today I have no crow to pick in my unending petition, nor do I expect to, not when I wake to forget it, move forward into radiance. Light coruscates, quivers in the malice tree with its yellow fruit which I record. Then I shield my eyes, illuminated and overtaken. Why do I hear this knock still? When I've left the house, I'm in the world and praising it. Birds scattering at my footfall and I note it. Why this pressure at my sorest point if I'm unwilling to step into fire, have fire erase this weight? Why not let me not be a purified being, not bearer of messages? Why not just a sound, clear-sighted woman with dog striding on autumn streets, tree-buried, leaf-strewn? Why not let me forget you after all? I can't live with you, world of each branch, so glittering, so distinct, nor without you I breathe all night, my body doing the thinking for me. I did not ask for a bush to burn, but it burns. I return in you too, alighting on a hand I hadn't thought I'd outstretched. Let's see. This is an elegy for Dee. Last night I dreamed of you, laughing the way we used to. I don't even know if this is true. Last night it stormed. Lightning lit the windows. I was the only one in the house to see it, I think. But who knows? I only catch the facts like the falling light catches insects, particulate whirling about some unknowable nucleus. The house purred like a cat. I wept last night alone in a cabin full of family 2 days after the car wreck. I carried a little soreness in my neck, a bodily simulacrum. I turned on my pillow, sought that pain, a self-enacting agony that would have made you impatient. Last night I dreamed we were reading a diagram that spelled your cancer's return. The sparrows fly in and out of the top branches. I drive as if I had not wrecked a car, walk in and out of the mall as if you had not died, cry as if you had never told me not to cry. I want to go home, have my own salt, knife, a closet of my own clothes, sleep through familiar storms, or else go to the bridge, sit down at the water's edge where swallows loop and loop through the air, eat the invisible insect's flight, where everything broadens like the caldera through which the river winds. Absolute clarity, or the absolute darkness in the close room where last night I slept and dreamt of you, just 2 nights after I was spared, a wonder and a sign, but of what? Last night you reproached me for these tears, and I woke. The loss is fresh in the absolute dark. I remember you. The facts fly around me, subatomic, buzz in my ears like gnats, visit the sky like a storm. This is a poem that I wrote couplet by couplet during last April, which is the cruelest month, but also, and not uncoincidentally, National Poetry Month. And so every day I wrote a couplet and sometimes 2. So this poem is, it was actually a really fun experiment to do that, to write it so slowly and deliberately. And it was, it's based on a constant misunderstanding that I had and forgetting of the name of a tree that is in my front yard, which is a honey locust. Anyway, so and that's all the explaining I'm going to do. Honey locust. They were already planted in the north-facing bank, though I had not chosen them. So always I must search for the name by leaf, by region, by absent thorn, by fruit, which, like the thorn, is supposed to have been bred out, but still manifests every fall. Hundreds of flat, black pods fallen and scattered, broken genome across the lawn and raked into compost, a few finding their way to ground. I pluck the saplings up when I find them, indulge stray geranium, flax, columbine, and thyme, but not trees. Not even trees with a biblical aura, though this, like my memory of the tree's name, is false. The Baptist is said to have eaten wild honey, locusts, not honey locust, though the seeds are apparently sweet, sugar having been extracted from the pods. I try to watch for the ways the branches tangle upward, try to remember light filtering through feathery leaves in a dream of summer, limbs heavying, try to remember snow, blossom from a cloud blown to downy blanket in the shape of a tree, the tree nothing but itself, sweetness without any purpose but to burst again every spring, to fling its seed forth and then to die back bare as it is right now in April. Tulips opening red and yellow, the color drawing me on a day too soon warm finally out to look. The trees, 3 of them, stout trunks that fork then fork again. There, they grow into one another. The day calls me to itself, but just as easily, I could say the afternoon calls me to bed for an hour of rain, the scent of a wet world splashing in through the window, and the wind, everything lashing and tossing and rough outside, and I am still, happiest for a chance to contemplate that eremite, the wilderness in which he is said to have tried his voice, to have sought one clarified, brilliant word. All this from a row of trees, 3 of them, preceding me as if they were an origin, the one tree, riddle, as if it were already guarded by an angel with a flaming sword. The story that will not quit me, a fall forever falling. It is the name, hyphenate, sense leaking at the stitch, that saves me after all, that sweet joined to pestilent, seeds syrupy, pawed like a plague. Which way shall I take the parable? Upflung branches vein a pearly sky, a net full of cloud and rain. It will reveal its mystery over its century and more. I look it up, and still it whispers. I think I hear it standing underneath its forsaken thorn. Honey, locust. I climb into the nimbus of its flower, peel back the bark. I'll not fashion it into a wilderness, nor eat its fruit to survive. Its shaggy branches, pinnate leaves, hold breeze, storm, wind of all stripes, the summer's hot-held breath, a plane flying far above, many birds, errant thorn, the impulse to fruit, some brief and fleeting murmur, ghost, they are after all my trees, of a voice, calling me to come away, come outside. Nope. Okay. All right, I've got, 4 more poems. They're good ones. Okay. This one I feel I must explain just a little bit. It's also an elegy. I had a friend who was an anthropologist, and one time he talked to me about, and he was particularly interested in the Four Corners area, but he also knew a story, which is legend and lore, about the Plains Indians, the Sioux, who had a ritual that they did near the last part of the 19th century called the ghost dance. And it was the idea that through this ritual they would regenerate the earth. I'm sorry, so much of this is in the poem, I shouldn't even be explaining it. But the thing that's interesting about it is that there was a story that perhaps some of the Sioux had been in touch with Mormons, and so had made themselves shirts with symbols worked into them they called ghost shirts, and that's the name of this poem, the ghost shirt. On the way back from Texas, in seats A and B, midway down the aisle, lights dimmed, intermittent, the plains roar hushed, above cloud in the night sky. He asked me about the ghost dance in the Mormons. I didn't know about the dance at all, so he explained it to me in that elliptical way he talked about anything, so that 1 1/2 paragraphs in, I always found myself searching for the subject. I remember he said, Sioux. I remember late 19th century. But now that he's gone, I've added that close, soft talk 12 years ago to a list of unfinished conversations. Another on the stairs at work, fearing he might be misjudged, he rehearsed his case to me as he always did, an argument he carried in his pocket to be exhumed and re-examined upon the occasions when nerves got the best of him. Latest, the time I'd returned from the Bighorns. I was trying to understand how I had never heard of the medicine wheel. I asked, were the caverns of slotted stone made or were they found? He said, such a distinction would be beside the point. The holiness neither found nor made. I had pictures, and he wondered why it mattered to me, which we would discuss the next time we met. I would buy his coffee. But the very last time I saw him, on the bed they'd made for him in his living room, cage fighting raging from the television screen, he struggled to free himself from the blankets. He wore a hospital gown, soft green, his bed the shape of a long box. I held his hand briefly, skin tanned by sun, by smoke. I let it go because he wanted to lift it, ask for something no one could ascertain. Perhaps he wanted to pull the sheet like a sky over himself, to be ended. The ghost dancers I only recently learned wanted to renew the earth, to restore themselves as its keepers. Some of them fashioned garments like those the Mormons wore, marked with symbols, calling them ghost shirts, made to protect them from harm. After the fighting at Wounded Knee, when a doctor began to cut the shirt from her, a Lakota woman said, "Take it. It was supposed to protect me. I don't want it anymore." At his wake, there was a picture, black and white. He was down in the hole so carefully dug to save any artifacts that might lie there. He leaned back against one wall, smoking a pipe. He had tied the apron with picks and brushes around his waist, tools for the ceremony of recovering a world. Three more. Litany. I dreamed I washed my hair in ash. At vigil, a forgotten light. The dog lay at the open door where the air spoke from the trees. Nothing, no intruder, no late child. In the music of that hour, fan ticking overhead, in an unwritten rhythm, crickets surging, last or first, highway cars. I dreamed I wore the white dress, my lap embroidered in leaves, where I held the book of my beseeching. The wood smelled of stain and varnish. This is my prayer. The curtains at the window breathe, a spirit caught between out and in. At Lauds, I bathed, dried my skin with a white towel, dressed in the clothes I had prepared. I waited in gray light, hands unlaced at my belly, fans crossed there lightly as if holding the ache would ease it. The porch light burnt out, the street dark as if it might stay dark all day. Okay, the title of this poem, Eidolon, means both ghost or phantom and ideal. Eidolon. The pop of the disconnect I feel as a point in space. What were the words he said, my son, in the language he's learning? The ghost of his silence, even that will not be there when the dial tone finishes, after he's asked the question I could not bring myself to answer. Are you willing? Words that echo here in the American dark. I take my stick, write in the dirt in a language only I speak, which I refuse to explain. If he were here, I would show him. I collect photographs of altars, though I kneel at none. The church on the corner hides an empty nave where the icon should go. If I could unpaint it, scrape the plaster down to the bare frame, just the idea of an altar, I would worship there. But I cannot say no either, willing and unwilling, neither here nor there, this nor that. At a mass for a friend's son, the priest said, a bereavement like this we never get over. I wonder, how will she ever again hold a book, thread a needle, walk, or even sleep? Will she unlearn her need for his presence, his voice occasionally on the phone, his seat at her table? But he is not there. To put off grief I leave, a weightlessness in the empty house failing to stay me, to the crook of the finger on the cape, where under a brilliant sky the sea and wind spelled uproar into my ear. To Dublin, where we stopped at every painted door, a church's red, its iron hinges with curled flourishes like an ancient script, binding of a holy book. We could have entered, but didn't, though later, at the Henry's Fork, we walked on a new old road, narrow, through a gate, nothing more than 2 posts. The hills held in their laps a shadow cast by cloud. We found a bridge where swallows kept their nests, though they were in constant flight. They traced glyphs over the glyphs of midge-flight. We watched, rapt, still, a vigil on which nothing depended. Is this the Hajj I'm on, underwritten by nothing but what I rebuff? How strenuous my effort not to follow the letter, how powerfully yet the form persists. I wake early or fail to sleep at all, watching for a return but of the ordinary son, somewhere riding his bicycle on roads that skirt a jungle, memorizing new words from cards he's made. He eats chicken and rice. It is ordinary, his absence, to the life I take up each day. I arise at 7 in an atmosphere composed by the small fact of him gone, the uncrippling real to which I accommodate. How years of presence collapse into one shining, then darkening star, failing as they all inevitably do. Willing for what? I should have asked him. The faculty of the will is that principle of mind by which it is capable of choosing, is what Jonathan Edwards said. And in the dailiness, I prove it again and again, rise to mourn in the day with no shortage of occasion. Just before he left, the vet let us sit with the dog who was about to die. A few weeks after that, my grandmother was gone. Then the cat disappeared for a week. I stood at the back door, calling her name into the field where mice play. I think of each loss in the same breath. I take it in, and in the instant it is taken from me. This is my calling, my pilgrimage. And after my vow of withholding, I am ready to speak. A bird loose has power and liberty to fly, but the bird's power of flying does not itself have the power and liberty to fly. To stand at that door is the faith I have of my own volition. It is my will to wait, awake and dreaming, arise each day as he does, going forward, wheeled creatures speaking another language at the edge of the South China Sea, plight myself to the green life beyond. The sparrow seeking what seed has fallen in the grass, a homely scent of turnsole, all day following the sun, at night turning to be ready for light. That seems like enough, doesn't it? One more. Okay, this one is the last poem and also the last Dublin poem that I'm going to read. So it's called The Oldest Public House in Dublin. September 2008. Observing the catastrophes, the fresh and the dead from abroad is better. Reading only foreign papers, the not American views of the cab drivers who ask our thoughts about the bailout and Iran and whether we'd seen the debate. Even a 7-hour delay makes the news wince a little less. Our flat over St. Augustine Street had no clock nor phone, so every night we guessed our bedtime from the all-Gaelic station on television. We'd wake at some dark hour as the people left the pubs. We slept 2 stories up, 1 street south of the Liffey, the Brazen Head around the corner. Each night a concert. First there were motors flaunting their gasoline, then sirens, then the gorgeous singing from down the block, symphonic, what sounded like a full chorus swelling a song I didn't know, except for the last line, sung solo, just under our window. Why don't you come on over, Valerie? I could have arisen, swooned over the tiny balcony, harmonized with no words, as I love to do. But I fretted about waking the grandchildren sleeping in the room next to us, as the singer gave it his all and kept going. Fretted that 2 stories and an open window were really perhaps not safe in a city we knew not at all. In an unknown place, why not sing? Instead, for each of 12 days, I dressed like a shadow, all smoke and night. It seemed elegant while I was packing, and simple, but after we arrived, very like a dirge. At home, it was just weeks before the election, but we tried every day to divine Irish history as we drove past Kilmainham jail or listened to one more cabbie expatiate about the terrorist versus patriot dilemma, how they put the wounded in the hospital to heal before they were executed, and how the cemetery at Glasnevin is filled with the illustrious dead. Maud Gunn, Charles Stewart Parnell, Michael Collins, even Hopkins with the Jesuits. The city is itself a map of troubles we cannot fathom, not really, no matter what we've read. And then each night, yet another song when the pubs, or were they bars, closed. Since I've been home, my body's been a mess. Sick of myself, dizzy, nerves still buzzing. I should have taken myself to one of the bridges, looked down into the water, thrown a little money into the river dividing the city, dark and dirty, to the sea. The morning we arrived, our driver explained the parks, the monuments, the cemetery, as they whooshed by. We passed a sign posted at the entrance of a small close. Be quiet and be tidy. It's the pubs, he said. You know the Irish and their singing. Thank you. Dr. Tuttle said that I might see if you had questions or anything. And he also said I should be patient. Yes.
Seems like you have a lot of new work. Do you have a new collection coming out?
That's the saddest question. I have manuscripts that I'm sending out, so that's where I am. But thanks for asking. Other questions? Yes, Kim?
How do you know when a poem's done?
That is the excellent question. I feel like that's a question I always have to ask myself. For instance, as I was driving down here, and my husband drove me, so I wasn't doing this actually while I was driving, but I went through these poems and I made some teeny little edits. So, I changed articles and took out a line and a half in a fairly recent poem. And I've heard several answers to this question. One time I was at an artist colony and I had a consultation with a really wonderful poet, Anne Waldman, and she was suggesting some things about a poem that I had submitted in this manuscript, and we talked about it, and I said, well, this poem was published. She said, oh, well, if it's published, it's finished. So that was one answer. I feel like there are people who have a much firmer sense of that than I do. I feel like a poem is finished or very, very close to it when I'm not tinkering with the basic argument anymore and with the basic sequence of things, when I'm only fussing around the edges of it. That's what I would say for myself. But I think there are people who have, again, a much firmer sense of that than I do. So, other questions? Yes.
So you seem to write a lot about loss and death. Does it help you, unless I'm reading into it wrong, does that help you live a happier life? Get out on the page.
That is such a good question also. She said I write a lot about loss and death, and does that help me lead a happier life? I'm not laughing at your question. It's a good question. I think people have to write what they have to write about. I also write a lot of poems about my dog, but I just didn't read those today. Actually, my dog figured, as you may have noticed in my poem. But anyway, I think I was talking to Jackie Osherow one time. I was driving her somewhere because at that time she didn't drive. We were going down to the prison, actually, to do a poetry talk with some prisoners. And she said, we were talking about another friend of ours who had a manuscript, and I said something about, a certain thread that ran through the manuscript. And she said, your subject is your subject. And let me just add one more anecdote, which will lead me to circle back to an answer to your question. I think sometimes I'm a member of a writing group, and I've been a member of it for many years now. So they've seen, what you just described. And I think that then these are my friends. So, when they say this, it's with, affection and caring for me. But there are times when I think they think my poems are excessively morose. But my subject is my subject. And, my temperament is my temperament. And so, I write I moved to write, and a happy life. I think I'm pretty happy. Mostly pretty happy. Yeah, I'd say, poetry serves the purpose of, this is another thing, okay, one more anecdote. I was talking to my son who went on a mission to Malaysia, learned Chinese, and is now majoring in Chinese at the University of Utah. So he's taking a bunch of classes, and like a lot of students who are taking the classes they're required to take, they have opinions about whether those classes are worth their time. And one of the classes he's taking this semester is a class in Chinese poetry, which he was like, and I'm like, dude, you're studying a language. You're going to have to learn something about the literature and the culture. He goes, but it's ancient. I'm like, Chinese is an ancient language and an ancient culture. You're going to have to learn. Anyway, so at dinner the other night, over soft tacos, we were talking about, sometimes you want to strike a young person into conversation who may or may not have an interest in sharing all the details of his or her life with you. That's a clue in case you don't have children yet. Just look forward to that. And I said, so how's that Chinese poetry class going? And he looks at me totally incredulous. He goes, how do you think? Poetry is stupid. So I'm not sure what poetry is for. I only know that I do it, and I like to do it at some level, or I wouldn't keep doing it. And it's part of how I live my life. And so when I've written something I like, that makes me happy. And yeah, does that sort of like swirl around what you asked?
I'm glad that you, I think that, anyway, I'm glad that you answered that way, that you have confidence in what you're writing. I mean, if you are trying to write for other people, it doesn't work very well.
Now, did you say I had confidence in what I'm writing? I'm not sure that's true, but not all the time anyway. Oh, yeah. Well, I mean, I'm confident that I must do it. That's the thing. So, other questions? I hope you don't think I'm being flippant. I love poetry, I love poets, and I love writing. But, I mean, there is a certain, dimension to writing it that is slightly absurd. Pardon me if anybody disagrees. Anyway, Bruce.
This is a kind of catch me up a little bit question. Who are your favorite poets now to read? I mean, you go home tonight and you have a free minute and you feel like reading a poem. Whose poem would you read?
I try to read as widely as I can, partly because I don't want to only read the people that sort of reinforce my own taste and stylistic tendencies. So there's a poet whose work I like and am interested in, even though it's kind of different than mine, Matthew Zapruder, a book called Come On, All You Ghosts, which I really love. And I love Robert Hass. I love still returning to the work of Larry Levis, and I still love Mark Strand's work. Let me think. I love Barbara Hamby and David Kirby. And I love Jack Gilbert and Linda Gregg. Those are some. Yes?
So I read that you teach academic writing, is that correct?
I teach composition and also writing studies and creative writing.
So I was wondering if you're able to plug in a lot of your creative writing, especially for poetry, to those composition classes to help students develop composition.
That's such a great question, and I'm glad you asked it because this year a colleague of mine and I have been thinking about that very question. That is, can you encourage students to be interested in language in the way that you expect students to become interested in language in a creative writing class? Can you do that in a composition class? And so we've tried to infuse a sort of attention to language, attention to form elements into our composition classes, which have been more focused on as if you can separate these things, but this is the way English studies is. It separates out literary studies and creative writing and rhetoric and composition, which is, I think, a tremendously unfortunate set of barriers that don't really help anyone except for people who are trying to define their own disciplinary expertise, i.e. teachers. So we've been trying to do that in our composition classes, and I'm encouraged by it. And I'm also we're trying to do attention to digital writing, which I think, also encourages a sense of play. And so sloppy answer is yes. Yes.
You mentioned your writers group. What do you think makes a good writers group?
I think people who aren't passive aggressive makes a good writers group, but people who will be honest with you. I think a writers group, there should be a basic commitment to each other. That is, that you hope to help each other. And I've been in this group for a very long time, and there's I remember a particular time when I came away from a writers group with some very sharp criticism stinging me, and I went to Target because that is where one salves one's wounds. And I remember standing in the Target and thinking, that hurt my feelings. But the basic thing is that even though it did hurt my feelings, it was an important piece of feedback at some level that I needed to hear. So people who are willing to be honest with you, but people who are committed to you as a writer, who are in the sense, your friend in the art. There's a great little teeny casual sonnet written by Robert Lowell where he talks about hearing Robert Frost reading, and Robert Frost signed a book to his friend in the art, to Robert, his friend in the art, which I think that's a great writers group, is people who are your friend in the art. Does that make sense? I think, and food, yes, that's right, lunch and that other thing. So Steve says we need to be out of here kind of shortly, so maybe that's it. Thank you so much for inviting me. It means so much for me to be here with you.